All right, let's dive deep. We're tackling how big things actually get done. Not your weekend to-do list, think ambitious projects, the kind that make you wonder, how do they even pull that off? From your dream kitchen renovation to, well, launching a rocket into space, we're uncovering the hidden factors separating soaring success from epic failure.
It is fascinating, isn't it? We often assume big achievements are all about grand visions, bold ideas, but the reality is the devil's in the details. And those details often reveal a surprising truth. Sometimes slowing down is the fastest way to reach your destination.
And that's what's so cool about this deep dive, right? We're not just speculating. We're using a massive database of real-world projects, the largest of its kind. It reveals patterns and trends that really challenge our assumptions about how success works.
One of the most striking findings is this counterintuitive idea. Slowing down in the planning phase can lead to faster project completion. It's think slow, act fast, a principle we'll explore.
Think slow, act fast. Sounds like a paradox. We're so conditioned to think speed is everything, especially in today's world. But data tells a different story. This reminds me of a story, the Great Belt Fixed Link project in Denmark. This massive infrastructure project involved building bridges and a tunnel under the sea to connect islands and improve transportation.
Ah, the Great Belt Project, a prime example of what happens when you ignore, think slow, act fast. Even though Denmark had a long history of successful bridge building, they were relatively inexperienced when it came to underwater tunnels.
Yeah, and I remember my father, who worked in construction his whole life, was very skeptical from the start. He said something like, if you're digging a hole that big underwater, you better make sure you've got the right people for the job.
Wise words. And as it turned out, the tunnel portion of the project went a whopping 120% over budget. And for the entire project, it was 55% over budget, almost double what they initially projected.
So they acted fast without thinking slow. They paid the price. And this think fast, act slow pattern isn't unique to Denmark. We see it here in the U.S. with the California high-speed rail.
Yes, the infamous bullet train, plagued by delays and cost overruns. Initially a $33 billion project to be done by 2020, it's 2024, nowhere near finished. Costs balloon, deadlines missed, the future's uncertain. A sobering example of how rushing into a massive project without planning realistic assessments leads to cascading problems.
It's that feeling we've all had, right? The excitement about a new project,
Yeah.
the rush to get started, and then bam, you hit roadblocks, delays pile up, and that quick win becomes a never-ending saga.
Exactly. The longer a project drags on, the more vulnerable it is to what we call black swan events. Unpredictable, high-impact events that throw even the best plans into disarray.
Black swans. Sounds ominous. Can you give us an example?
Think COVID-19's impact on the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. Nobody could have predicted a global pandemic that would force the postponement of such a massive event.
Right. And it's not just global pandemics. Even seemingly minor events can disrupt everything. The Ever Given, that container ship stuck in the Suez Canal.
Precisely. It seemed minor at first, but cascaded into global supply chain disruptions. Even the most carefully planned projects can be derailed by the unexpected.
So rushing without a plan is a recipe for disaster. Got it. But what leads to this think fast, act slow cycle? What causes us to stumble?
A big culprit is the commitment fallacy. There's no better illustration than the construction of the Pentagon.
The Pentagon. Now, that's a story I'm eager to hear. Iconic building, but I can't imagine its construction was easy. What's the commitment fallacy, and how did it play out?
Imagine being told to design the world's largest office building in a weekend. That's essentially what happened with the Pentagon. The pressure to get things moving quickly, combined with political considerations, led to a rushed commitment to a plan without fully thinking it through.
Wow, no wonder there were problems. They jumped in without thinking about the potential consequences. Sounds chaotic.
Exactly. The initial design was completely scrapped because it would have blocked the view of Arlington National Cemetery. They ended up with the Pentagon shape because it fit the awkwardly shaped plot of land they had to use after their first choice was rejected.
So, the design was dictated by constraints, not a clear vision. Acting before thinking, as one critic put it. But let's unpack this commitment fallacy. What is it, and why do we fall for it?
It's the premature lock into a decision without fully considering your goals, alternative solutions, and potential risks. It's fueled by optimism bias and our tendency to overestimate our control over outcomes.
Oh, I think we're all guilty of that. Like when you think you can get across town in 20 minutes, but then hit rush hour and end up hopelessly late.
Exactly. We tend to focus on the best case scenario, underestimating the time, resources, and unexpected challenges that always arise. And with large projects, unrealistic expectations have major consequences.
So if jumping to solutions is bad, how should we approach planning? We need a better way to make decisions, avoiding pitfalls that lead to delays and budget overruns.
That's where thinking from right to left comes in. It may seem counterintuitive, but it's incredibly powerful.
Right to left. Okay, now I'm intrigued. Are we talking about some mind-bending technique?
Not really. It's about shifting our perspective, starting with the end in mind. Instead of solutions, we begin by defining the why of our project, the ultimate goal.
Okay, I see. Instead of the how, we nail down the why. But can you give us a real-world example?
Let's revisit David and Deborah's kitchen renovation nightmare. They were so focused on aesthetics, fancy countertops, custom cabinets. They jumped into solutions without a clear goal.
Right, they wanted all the bells and whistles before figuring out what they needed and wanted from their kitchen. That cost them, didn't it?
It did. Their project spiraled, costing an extra $500,000 and delaying their move-in by over a year.
Ouch. That's a painful lesson. How could they have used this right-to-left thinking to avoid that?
The key is to start with the box on the right, a visual representation of a well-defined goal. In their case, it might have been creating a functional and inviting space for cooking and entertaining.
I like that. It's simple, clear, and gets to the heart of what they wanted. But how do you define that goal in a way that's meaningful and actionable?
That's where questioning comes in. Think of Frank Gehry, the architect. He doesn't immediately start sketching designs when meeting clients. He has long, in-depth conversations, asking questions to uncover their needs, aspirations, fears, everything.
So it's about understanding before creating. Instead of imposing his vision, he's taking time to explore theirs.
Exactly. He always starts with why. Why are you doing this project? That unlocks insights and leads to a deeper understanding of the project's true purpose.
Like peeling back the layers of an onion. You start with the desire for a new kitchen, and then keep asking why to uncover the motivations and desires underneath.
And this shouldn't stop with the client. It's equally important to challenge your own assumptions and explore alternative solutions. This is where Amazon's PRFAQ method is powerful.
PRFAQ. Tell me more about this Amazon approach.
At Amazon, when pitching a new project, you write a press release and an FAQ as if the project was already successful. This forces you to articulate the value proposition clearly and anticipate potential questions and challenges.
Brilliant. You have to think through the entire project lifecycle before beginning, like a pre-mortem, identifying potential pitfalls.
You can't hide behind buzzwords or vague promises when using clear, jargon-free language. The thinking has to be solid and the value proposition clear.
So how would this PRFAQ method have applied to David and Deborah's kitchen renovation?
Imagine them writing a press release. Amazing new kitchen, perfect for cooking gourmet meals and hosting unforgettable gatherings. Then, in the FAQ, answering, how did you stay within budget? Or what were the biggest challenges?
That's a great exercise. They'd quickly realize their high-end kitchen vision might not align with their budget or lifestyle. They might discover they prefer casual dining or value functionality over fancy appliances.
Exactly. This method forces you to confront those realities early on, potentially saving you heartache and money down the line. It's thinking slow to ensure you can act fast later.
Okay, so we've defined the goal using the box on the right and the PRFAQ method. What's next in this think slow, act fast approach? How do we move from defining the goal to planning?
Now we embrace a planning technique that might seem familiar, but with a twist. It harnesses our natural ability to learn from trial and error. It's something Pixar has mastered.
Pixar, the creators of Toy Story and Finding Nemo. I associate that name with creativity and innovation. How does a movie studio's planning apply to building a bridge or launching a rocket?
The principles are universal. Think of the Sydney Opera House. It's a stunning masterpiece, but the construction was plagued with problems, massive cost overruns, and years of delays.
Yeah, they apparently jumped into construction without figuring out how to build those complex sail-like structures. They had to dynamite sections and start over.
Exactly. It's a classic example of acting too fast without thinking things through. Now contrast that with the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, Spain, another architectural marvel by Frank Gehry. This time, he insisted on meticulous planning, using digital modeling to test and refine the design before breaking ground.
And the results are clear. The Guggenheim Bilbao was finished on time and on budget, a global sensation and a testament to thoughtful planning.
Precisely. And the key to both Pixar's success and Gehry's approach is iteration.
Iteration. So it's not just about having a plan, but revising and refining it along the way.
Exactly. Pixar creates detailed storyboards and tests them with audiences, gathering feedback and refining the story multiple times before animation.
Like a dress rehearsal before opening night, making sure the story flows and resonates before investing in costly animation.
Geary uses digital models to simulate construction, ensuring every detail is considered. Potential problems are identified and solved before they become expensive real-world issues.
Like the difference between a rough sketch and a detailed blueprint.
Exactly. This iterative approach has two key benefits: early identification of problems, preventing costly rework later, and thorough testing, leading to smoother, more predictable delivery.
Sounds like the ultimate recipe for avoiding think fast, act slow disasters. But planning is only part of it. You need the right people to execute the plan, people with the skills and experience to bring it to life.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the often overlooked value of experience in project management. It's not just technical skills, it's the wisdom and intuition to navigate the complexities of real-world projects.
Okay, preach. I'm all about experience. Remember that time the Danish court system was considering a massive IT overhaul? I advised against being a first mover based on my research.
Yes, you wisely pointed out that sometimes it's better to let someone else be the guinea pig and learn from their mistakes.
Exactly. Why reinvent the wheel? But why is experience so often marginalized in project planning? Why do we sometimes prioritize shiny new ideas over the wisdom of those who have been there and done that?
There are a few factors. First, politics often trumps practicality. Governments are pressured to award contracts to local companies, even if they lack experience, to boost local economies or gain political favor.
It's like that old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know.
Sadly, that's often true.
Mm.
Second, there's the allure of being first, the innovator, the pioneer. But as you've seen, that ambition can lead to overlooking valuable lessons from existing projects.
And it's like that shiny new gadget that everyone raves about, but then it's full of bugs because the technology isn't mature yet. Sometimes it's better to wait for the second or third generation.
Exactly. And that's where tacit knowledge comes in. It's the deep, intuitive understanding from years of experience, the kind that's hard to articulate or teach.
Like learning to ride a bike.
Right.
You just know how to balance and steer, but it's hard to explain to someone who hasn't.
Precisely. And that tacit knowledge separates experienced project leaders from those following a playbook. Think of Frank Gehry or Pixar's Pete Docter. They have this incredible ability to anticipate problems, spot opportunities, and make decisions based on their deep understanding of their craft.
Like they have a sixth sense, an intuition that guides them through the complexities.
And that intuition, combined with structured planning, is powerful for success, balancing data with human judgment, the analytical with the intuitive.
So we've got planning, we've got experience. What's next in making big things happen? What other key factors do we need to consider?
Well, even with the best plan and the most experienced team, things can go wrong. Remember those black swans? So we need to talk about accurately predicting costs and managing risks.
Ah, predicting costs. The age-old problem that's sunk countless projects. I'm reminded of Robert Caro, the biographer, who drastically underestimated the time to write his masterpiece.
Oh, yes, the planning fallacy. He thought it would take a year, but it took 5.
And that's surprisingly common for big projects. We tend to underestimate costs and overestimate benefits, a cognitive bias that can trip us up.
The planning fallacy, fueled by our desire for things to be simpler than they are. We anchor to best-case scenarios and fail to account for the complexities and challenges that arise.
It's like packing for a trip, thinking you can fit everything in a small carry-on. But then reality hits, and you're left with an overflowing suitcase.
Exactly. We underestimate the space, the time, the resources, and the unexpected obstacles.
So how do we break free from the planning fallacy? We need realistic predictions that won't drown us in cost overruns. What's the secret?
The solution is reference class forecasting, RCF.
RCF. Intriguing, but a bit technical. How does it work? How does it help us make more accurate predictions?
The key is shifting our perspective. Instead of viewing our project as unique, we see it as a member of a class of similar projects done before.
So my kitchen renovation isn't unique. There's a whole universe of kitchen renovations out there, with their costs, timelines, and challenges.
Precisely. RCF taps into real-world data to create accurate, unbiased forecasts. We use the average outcome of those similar projects as our anchor and adjust based on our specific factors.
It's like looking at a map before a journey. You sense the terrain, the routes, and the average time to your destination.
That knowledge helps you make informed decisions and avoid getting lost. grounding predictions in reality, not wishful thinking.
Makes sense. But if RCF is so effective, why isn't it more widely used? It seems like a no-brainer for managing large projects.
Well, that's where things get complicated.
Uh-oh. Complicated. I feel like we're entering the realm of human behavior and organizational dynamics.
Let's just say some people and organizations benefit from inaccurate forecasts. It's easier to get a project approved if you downplay the costs and overstate the benefits.
The classic bait and switch. Get the project greenlit and deal with the consequences later.
Unfortunately, that's common. But fortunately, there's growing awareness of accurate forecasting. Tools like RCF are gaining traction, especially in government and large organizations accountable to taxpayers or shareholders.
So, there's hope for a future where projects are grounded in reality, not wishful thinking. But even with the best forecasting, there's always a chance of unforeseen challenges, right? How do we manage risk in a world where black swan events seem to be lurking everywhere?
That's a great question, and it leads us to a counterintuitive idea. Sometimes ignorance can be your friend.
Wait, ignorance. I thought we were all about knowledge here. Help me understand this. How can ignorance be good for managing risk?
It's not about being uninformed or reckless. It's about acknowledging the limits of our knowledge, accepting that we can't predict everything that might happen.
Okay, so it's not about being clueless, more about accepting that we can't see everything coming.
Right. We can't always plan for every scenario, especially those black swans, the ones that pop up out of nowhere.
Yeah, those. And sometimes, if you try to plan for every single thing that could possibly happen, well, it can be paralyzing.
Sure.
It can stop you from actually doing anything and adapting when things change.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, right? Having a plan, but being ready to adjust when things inevitably don't go as planned.
So having a plan, but being flexible.
Yeah, precisely. A great example, the movie Jaws. A classic case of how unexpected challenges can actually lead to creative solutions.
The Jaws. A classic. But wasn't the production, famously chaotic?
It was. The mechanical shark, they nicknamed him Bruce, was constantly breaking down. This forced Spielberg, the director, to improvise to suggest the shark was there without actually showing it.
And that's how you get one of the most terrifying movies ever. The limitations actually made it scarier, more effective.
Exactly. It's what some people call the hiding hand principle. Unforeseen problems leading to innovation, better results.
But isn't that like survivorship bias? We're only seeing the projects that worked out despite the chaos, not the ones that failed because of a lack of planning.
That's a good point. Jaws is an exception, not the rule. For every project that succeeds in spite of chaos, there are tons that fail.
Right. And even creative masterpieces like Pixar movies, those are planned meticulously. They use iteration and improvisation, but there's a solid foundation there, a well-defined story, a careful plan.
Absolutely. Planning is crucial. And there's another thing to think about when it comes to risk, the impact of stress on our creativity and decision-making.
Stress hindering creativity. That makes sense. When you're stressed out, overwhelmed, you're probably going to make impulsive decisions or get stuck.
Precisely. There's research that shows that stress actually blocks our ability to think clearly, to come up with new solutions.
So creating an environment where people feel safe, taking risks, experimenting, that's crucial for creativity.
It's about building a culture where mistakes are seen as learning experiences, not failures.
So we've talked about planning, experience, managing risk. What's the final piece? What brings it all together?
The final piece, and maybe the most important, is teamwork. You can have the best plan, but if you don't have a team working together, it won't matter.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Having everyone aligned on the goals, willing to work together to get there.
Exactly. And I'm reminded of that hydroelectric dam project, the one where the leadership team had no experience with dams.
Oh yeah, the one that almost ruined the province's economy.
That's the one. It's a classic case of the wrong people in the wrong roles. They hired executives from the oil and gas industry, thinking that experience with big projects would transfer over to dam building.
It didn't, did it? What happened there?
They didn't have the specific knowledge, the understanding of the challenges involved in building a dam. And it shows how important it is to have the right people in the right roles. People with the skills, but also the willingness to work together. The shared commitment to the project's goals.
So how do you build that kind of dream team? That single determined organism, as our source material puts it. Give us a success story, an example of a project where teamwork made all the difference.
A great example is Heathrow Airport's Terminal 5. Known for its exceptional teamwork, it was finished on time.
Terminal 5, that's a busy place. I can't imagine trying to build something that massive while keeping the airport running.
It was an incredible feat of coordination and collaboration. Three key strategies: detailed planning, using digital simulations, innovative construction methods from the car industry, and strong leadership from BAA, the airport operator, to foster collaboration and get everyone on the same page.
So it wasn't just managing tasks, it was managing people, creating an environment where everyone felt valued and wanted to do their best.
Exactly. They used contracts that rewarded performance and shared the risk. It was a win-win for everyone. One construction supervisor, Richard Harper, said it was a level of cooperation unlike anything he'd seen in his career.
Wow. Sounds like they built a culture of trust and shared purpose. Everyone wearing their Terminal 5 gear with pride, even after work.
It shows what strong leadership, clear communication, and the right incentives can do. They created a team that achieved incredible results.
Okay, we've talked about planning, experience, risk, teamwork. Is there like one overarching concept that brings it all together? A grand unifying theory of how big things get done?
There is. It's surprisingly simple. Modularity?
Modularity. Like Lego blocks.
You got it. Building big things from smaller, standardized pieces. Think about a brick wall or a beehive. Even our bodies are made up of modular units.
Okay, I see. It's about breaking things down into manageable chunks, things that can be assembled and scaled efficiently. But what about real-world examples? How does modularity work in large-scale projects?
Look at school construction in Nepal. They built thousands of schools that could withstand earthquakes, quickly and efficiently, using a modular approach. They prefabricated components in factories, then assembled them on site, like building cars.
It's like a giant Lego set with life-saving results.
Yeah.
And speaking of Lego, the Madrid Metro, their subway expansion, they used a similar approach. They treated tunnels as modular units, which sped up construction and saved a ton of money.
Exactly. Modularity isn't just about efficiency, it's about reducing risk.
Okay, how does modularity reduce risk?
Well, think about thin-tailed versus fat-tailed distributions. Projects with predictable outcomes versus those with a higher chance of extreme, unpredictable events. The 5 least risky project types, solar power, wind power, power plants, and so on, they're all highly modular.
So by breaking things down, you're reducing the chances of a black swan event derailing the project. You're spreading the risk.
Exactly. And this leads to what we call the China experiment. It really shows the power of modularity.
Okay, tell me about the China experiment. What does it teach us about modularity?
China invested a lot in big nuclear power plants, but they also embraced modular solutions like wind power. And wind power turned out to be more efficient, more cost-effective, and easier to scale.
And that's reflected in the growth of the wind energy industry.
Right.
Companies like Ørsted, a Danish company that shifted from fossil fuels to renewable energy incredibly fast. They used a modular approach. They're basically treating wind turbines as giant Lego blocks, assembling huge wind farms that now power entire countries.
It's a great example of how modularity speeds up innovation, drives down costs, and can completely transform industries. It can even help us address global challenges like climate change.
So modularity isn't just about building things better, it's about creating systems that are more resilient, more adaptable, and more sustainable.
Exactly. It's a principle that can be used for any project, from making a website to building a skyscraper.
So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What's the one big idea they should walk away with?
Think slow, act fast. Embrace modularity in your own projects. Break down complex goals into smaller steps. Iterate, learn from experience, and build a team that shares your vision. And remember, even seemingly impossible goals can be achieved. Just break them down into those Lego blocks of success. We're not talking about, just not knowing things. It's more about understanding that we can't know everything and accepting that there are always going to be things we can't predict.
Okay, so it's not about being clueless, more about, I guess, acknowledging the limits of what we can know.
Exactly. And, we can't plan for every possible scenario, especially those black swan events, the ones that seem to come out of nowhere.
Yeah, those can really throw a wrench in the works.
Yeah.
And I guess if you tried to plan for every single thing that could happen, you'd never actually get anything done.
You'd be paralyzed, stuck in the planning phase forever. So yeah, it's about finding that balance, having a plan, but also being flexible enough to adapt when things change, because they always do.
Having a plan, but staying flexible. Got it.
Right. And a great example of this, the movie Jaws. It's a classic case of how unexpected problems, challenges, they can actually lead to creative solutions.
Jaws. Oh, man, I love that movie. But wasn't the production, like, super chaotic?
It was. The mechanical shark, they called him Bruce. He was always breaking down,
Mhm.
malfunctioning. So Spielberg, the director, he had to get creative. He had to find ways to suggest that the shark was there without actually showing it.
And the result? One of the most terrifying movies ever made. It's funny how those limitations, they actually ended up making the movie better, scarier.
It's true. It's what some people call the hiding hand principle, the idea that sometimes those unforeseen difficulties can actually lead to innovation, to better outcomes.
Okay, that's interesting. But isn't there a bit of survivorship bias at play here? I mean, we only hear about the projects that worked out despite the chaos, not the ones that failed because there wasn't enough planning.
That's a fair point. It's important to keep in mind that Jaws is an exception, not the rule. I mean, for every project that succeeds in spite of chaos, there are countless others that, well, they crash and burn.
Right. And even those really creative masterpieces like those Pixar movies, those are planned out meticulously. They're not just winging it.
Exactly. They use iteration, they improvise, but it's all based on a solid foundation, a good story, a careful plan. Planning is essential.
Okay, so planning is key. But there's another thing to think about when we talk about risk, right? The impact of stress. How stress can actually hinder creativity and decision-making.
Absolutely. It makes sense, right? When you're stressed, when you're feeling overwhelmed, you're more likely to make impulsive decisions. You might get stuck in a rut.
Yeah, I've definitely been there.
Well, there's research showing that stress actually makes it harder to think clearly. It blocks our ability to come up with new ideas, innovative solutions.
So it's really important to create an environment where people feel safe.
hmm
Safe to take risks, safe to experiment. That's how you foster creativity.
It's about building a culture where it's okay to make mistakes, a culture where mistakes are seen as opportunities to learn, not as failures.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've talked about planning, about experience, about managing risk.
Mm.
As we wrap things up, what are some of the key takeaways? What can our listeners apply to their own projects, to their own goals?
Well, first, remember the power of thinking slow. Take the time to really define your goals, explore different options, think about the challenges you might face. Use those tools we talked about, like the box on the right and the PRFAQ method, to make sure you're starting with a solid foundation.
Right. Don't just jump into action. Think things through.
Second, don't be afraid to experiment, to test your ideas, make adjustments along the way, view setbacks as opportunities to learn.
Like Pixar does with their storyboarding.
Right.
Or Frank Gehry with his digital models.
Exactly. And third, remember the importance of experience, that tacit knowledge. Seek out advice from people who have been there, who have done that. Don't be afraid to learn from their successes and their mistakes.
And sometimes it's better to be a fast follower than a first mover.
Absolutely. And fourth, use those tools like reference class forecasting to make better predictions about costs, timelines, potential risks. Base your expectations on reality, not just wishful thinking.
And finally, the importance of teamwork. Build a strong team, a group of people who share your vision, who are willing to work together to support each other, who are all committed to achieving the goals of the project.
It's about building a culture of trust,
Yeah.
transparency, where everyone feels valued, where everyone feels like they can contribute.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. We've explored all these factors that determine whether big things succeed or fail. We've learned so much from real-world projects, from visionaries and innovators and leaders in all kinds of fields.
And we hope that this has given you the tools and the knowledge to tackle your own big goals, whether you're renovating a kitchen, starting a business, or, reaching for the stars.
With the right approach, anything is possible. So go out there and make big things happen.